going to have a panel discussion here. We're going to talk about the EAA, the European Accessibility Act, and really its impact on our digital products and our landscape here in Europe, which is really, really exciting. I'm going to take a seat, because let's get comfortable with this. I've got three incredible panelists here beside me. Karen Hawkins, a human factors engineer, certified accessibility professional, over 13 years experience. You're a member of the IAAP Careers Pathway Working Group, currently leading the accessibility design practice at Level Access. And you train global teams on integrating accessibility into really every aspect of their sort of product journeys as well, which is pretty phenomenal.
I try. Yeah.
You've tried.
Yes.
And you've traveled here all the way from?
Toronto, Canada.
You're very, very welcome. So big round of applause for Karen. And joining Karen, we've got Gareth and Mick, both principal digital accessibility engineers at Optum. And I'm also from Optum, so I do know them very, very well. Gareth is a certified professional in web accessibility, working really with cross-functional teams across Optum to ensure all of our digital properties are fully inclusive. You're also the founding member of Accessibility Ireland. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later on as well. And that's a group that's dedicated to building a community of accessibility advocates here in Ireland. So it's fantastic. So welcome, Gareth.
Thank you, Patrick.
And last but not least is Mick. Mick is Optum's standards lead and a key contributor to the Mobile Accessibility Task Force at W3C. You're also a co-founder of Accessibility Ireland. There's three of them. I can see Michael there as well. So, hey, Michael, why aren't you on the stage? We'll give you this pass. And you also lead our digital inclusion employee resource group here in Optum. So you're doing an awful lot for the company, which is phenomenal to see. You have extensive experience in accessibility testing, compliance, and training as well. So really, we've got an expert panel here this morning. I'm very, very excited to see where we end up. Now, of course, this is an interactive panel. I'm up here. I've got some questions, but really, I want to hear from you. I believe we've got a throw mic, and I can see the questions coming through here as well. So please ask questions, and I'll try out to those. You can either ask a question live or do it online, and we'll bring you in. So let's get started. Karen. We talked about that you lead the sort of the design practice at Level Access. What I'm really interested in is, can you tell us a little bit about that and how you actually work with clients to actually train them in digital accessibility and even accessible design thinking?
Sure, thanks. So hi, everyone, first and foremost. It was mentioned that I'm a human factors engineer. So really, I'm an industrial engineer. So that's like systems engineering, process, logic, statistics, that kind of thing, with a subspecialty in human factors. And I think it's important because that's really shaped my perspective on design, and more specifically, accessible design. So I have a pretty cool job working at Level Access. Like, I get to work with customers and colleagues, and my goal is to elevate this concept of accessible design. Like, not just the nuance of how to design a button to be accessible, fine, but like, how do we make the whole process more efficient, and how do we make it more sustainable? Because we need it to stick. Like, we're not there yet with stickiness, right? And so the question around accessible design thinking, it's not unlike design thinking, right? Like, what is design thinking? You're trying to get to understand your users, and you need to understand what their needs are. You're designing for a diverse set of needs. But I think the accessibility extension of that is that the group of users for whom you're designing, well, it's probably a larger user group than what you're used to designing for. And then their needs are probably more diverse than what you're used to designing for. So think about it. You're a designer. You try so hard to design for these users, right? You try so hard to get to understand them and to get to understand their needs. So now think about that in the context of accessibility and disability. The goal is that we're trying to design for just everybody. We're trying to design absolutely amazing experiences for everybody, right? And so I think what we need to do is, it might sound a little odd, but we need to actually get away from just thinking about the user when we're thinking about accessibility. We can't just be human-centric. That's the thing that sounds odd, because we need to start designing for a system. That system includes the human, and we're all able and we're all flawed in different ways. But it also includes all of the technologies that we use, and they help us interact with these experiences that we're designing. So this system, I think, is the perspective, and it's a human factors kind of perspective. Think about the person and the technologies that they use in a given environment, and we're designing where they interface.
Absolutely love that. That's really thinking about the service and holistically. I think that's incredible, and it's taking you beyond that digital touch point. That we're not just designing for that one point interaction. You're designing for the whole of their experience. I think it's pretty incredible. And getting into digital accessibility, Gareth, I'd love to ask you, how did you get into this as a career?
Cool, yeah, so good morning, everyone. Like most accessibility professionals that I know, got into it sort of by accident. There's no formal route to becoming an accessibility professional, I would say. So prior to joining Optum, I worked as a graphic designer for another large American corporation, where our function was to create marketing materials, interactive forms. We were an insurance company. So there's lots of those type of materials, and we were then tasked with ensuring that those materials were accessible, something I knew absolutely nothing about. I had to start doing research. I got a mentor. It had never crossed my mind that there are people that access digital content other than using their eyes and with their hands. So my mind was a bit blown with that. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it to start. PDF documents, quite laborious work. So then I wanted to expand from that into web more generally. So that's when I started with Optum around 7.5 years ago, and that's kind of what I've been doing since.
Fantastic. I always like to talk about you have a eureka moment, and you don't necessarily choose your career, you end up in it. And it's by attending conferences like this, attending even meetups, that you get to open your horizons to see that there's wonderful areas to explore. And that sort of leads me very nicely, Mick, into Accessibility Ireland. It's a fantastic group, and it's really a force of change within Ireland. Maybe can you talk a little bit about the foundation of that group, and maybe some of the initial goals that you're hoping to achieve?
Sure, thanks Patrick, and hi everyone. So myself, Gareth, and Michael Hanton, we set up Accessibility Ireland with the intention really of building advocates and awareness around digital accessibility, specifically in Ireland, through networking and education, essentially. We've all worked in the accessibility, or as accessibility professionals, give or take 7-8 years, but we've all done work in other countries, essentially, because that's where legislation and where the jobs are. There's very few accessibility professionals actually working on Irish products, unfortunately. So we wanted to see Irish products accessible, essentially, and wanted to see what we could do. So we have a good network, been in the industry long in terms of accessibility professionals, but also designers and developers who've gone on the journey of not knowing about accessibility, thinking it's hard, to now incorporate it into their work, and also people with disabilities. So the idea of bringing those people into a room and talking to designers, developers who are starting off, and kind of sharing that experience, I think it's a really good starting point in getting, and that's been our aim.
That's fantastic. And I think that sort of thread that we're all working for an international sort of stage, we're supporting clients and products internationally, bringing it home to Ireland through Accessibility Ireland is quite special, because of course we're going to turn our attention to the European Accessibility Act, and that was originally coded into law back in 2019. And really it's a directive that mandates that all European Union member states have to implement local laws to ensure that products and services and certain criterion meet minimum accessibility requirements. So I'd like to explore that a little bit. Karen, this new legislation that's coming into Europe will have very significant impacts, I believe, on services and products. Maybe can you give us a little bit of a breakdown about what it actually means for us as UX professionals and developers and product individuals?
Sure. So I'll begin by saying I'm not a lawyer.
Of course,
Hope that's
absolutely.
fair to say.
Yeah.
But I think what's great about the EAA, the European Accessibility Act, is that the tenets of it are that they're trying to enact real change. And I think that's what we need. We need real change. I'm really done with this thing is broken, let's fix it. I'm really tired of that, right? I'm really happy about the extension beyond what we're used to designing for when we think about accessibility, which is just digital, right? So we have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. I'm hoping you're working towards 2.2, AA, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, AAA if you can. But now what's been introduced is another technical specification, EN 301549. It's a horrible name. But what it does is it gives us a more comprehensive framework to apply accessible thinking to a broader set of technologies. So we're talking about products and services that affect the public. So if your organization serves consumers in any way, then the likelihood is that the EAA affects your organization. So what's cool is we're not just talking about digital, like I said, software. So yeah, there's ebooks and banking services, transportation services, but e-com, there's a lot of e-com. Are there any e-com people? Yeah, so it's a big deal. There's also kiosks and point-of-sale terminals. So that's what's great about it, is that we're now thinking beyond just the minute touch points. And what Patrick mentioned is more like service design. We really need to be starting to think about how we're designing absolutely everything and all of their interacting touch points too.
Absolutely. Gareth, we are seeing a lot of movement already throughout Europe in relation to the Accessibility Act. Maybe can you tell us a little about the impact it will have for companies, maybe here in Ireland, and maybe the impact to the broader digital landscape?
So I think generally it's going to be really positive for companies. Because right now, selling products and services into Europe, you have to consider the national frameworks of every member state, whereas this will unify that. They'll all be harmonized, following the same. From a market perspective, you're going to essentially, if your product is accessible or your service is accessible, you're going to expand your market reach, because across the European Union, there's around or over 100 million people with disabilities. So right now, if you're inaccessible, they may not be able to access your product or service. So I think that's hugely beneficial. If you act early and make your product or service accessible, you're going to have a competitive edge over those that don't. And also, there's a lot of brand loyalty among people with disabilities for companies that consider them, among themselves, their families and friends, and also people in favor of inclusion.
So that's the impact really for companies, and getting in early creates that really big impression and makes a big, strong statement as well. Mick, I'd like to explore maybe what is the impact of this legislation on the field and the practice of digital accessibility. Do you feel accessibility is going to evolve and change throughout Europe as a result of this?
I hope so. I think it brings focus. It's the stick. Legislation is the stick to the carrot. It now makes very much a big awareness around accessibility. And it's going to succeed and fail in terms of how companies implement it. And to Karen's point, there is a real service design kind of point of view to it. Like if you take someone with this legislation now, someone who's blind and wants to go on a holiday. So you look at the websites and the apps they're going to buy their tickets through that, they have to be accessible. But when they arrive at the airport and they have to check in their bags and their luggage, the kiosks have to be accessible with screen readers. When the announcements of what gate has to go through, are they in audio and text format? Are the staff trained? Is there braille signage when you exit the airport? The transport information, is that accessible? So it really brings a much kind of wider picture to it, which the end goal hopefully is a much more accessible experience. In terms of kind of, the digital aspect, in terms of websites and applications, we're looking at WCAG likely 2.2 in June of 2025, level AA. And I think when companies are if they're looking and focused on meeting compliance and kind of fixing issues constantly, as Karen mentioned, it's not going to evolve. But if you're looking at embedding accessibility throughout your practice at the design, developer, product owner phase, and really doing it properly, then I think it's going to be brilliant.
Wonderful. A following question, and maybe I can open this up to Gareth and Karen as well, but Mick, I'm wondering, will this be a catalyst for innovation? will companies really innovate as a result of this, or will companies struggle?
It's a good question. It depends on the company, I suppose. I hope so. I think the fact that it's looking at that whole experience, and there's various standards, not just standards around the digital aspect, I'd be hopeful.
Yeah.
I might just add, Karen speaking here, that what I'm hopeful about is that we'll be focusing more proactively,
Yes.
I think, right? So if we're talking about service design, but like I'm a designer. So we're at the beginning of the process, not excluding research and requirements. But if we start to design things with accessibility in mind, and we're considering, again, not just the digital, but the human, technologies, the environment, the socio, the economic, right? Like, there's a lot of compounding factors that can go into that design. All it does is it is just forcing us to think about it earlier in the process. You know, you've heard shift left. I really actually don't like that because it implies shifting left of dev. But it's good because it's forcing us to do the work earlier. So I think that that's a good thing.
Absolutely. Again, a reminder, I'm seeing some questions coming through already. If you do have a question, please ask it. We'll get to those questions now in a moment. Maybe, Gareth, can we explore maybe low-effort changes that teams here can start today to implement that will have a high impact on the accessibility of their products and services?
Yeah, so I guess there's multiple angles you could look at that. I think one, and this is probably quite a boring one, but it's collaboration. What I've seen from working on lots of teams is that different disciplines can be quite siloed. So like design work on their piece, pass it along, and there's no discussion between the different disciplines. And that is just a cause for major issues, is what I find. So if you come up with a new concept, a new design, a new prototype, have everybody that's a part of it around the table at the start to discuss, because you will find that you'll be able to like rule out certain things at that point rather than getting them too far down the line, and yeah, push back as well as part of that. So being able to push back on business requests that maybe don't make sense, like UX should feel empowered. They are the professionals. You often hear of businesses essentially designing the experience, and designers then just have to like mock it up in Figma. So like we don't want to be doing that.
So, Mick, maybe let's explore the design aspect. There's a wonderful myth that accessibility can hinder the creative process. Maybe talk to us about that.
Sure, yeah. I think one of the first accessibility professionals I ever heard speak was Leona Watson at a conference, and she gave a talk called Coding Like I Give a Damn, which I think is a great title. She was also giving a talk called Design Like I Give a Damn. But one of her quotes from it was, accessibility is not a challenge to creativity, it's a creative challenge. And I think that's where the focus needs to be. It's a mindset. If you are looking at accessibility through the lens of, I have the restriction based on these standards, and where if you're looking, and what Karen mentioned earlier, accessibility kind of, it enhances the user experience. I'm going to create a site for everyone, or I'm going to create a product for everyone. And a lot of what accessibility does is for everyone. If you take something like captions or transcripts, really important for someone who's deaf in terms of being able to understand what's being said, but how many of us have turned on captions when the environment's very loud, or you can't understand the accent, or you've relied on transcripts when you've missed a meeting and you can go back. So it really enhances the user experience.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, we have the wonderful idea of universal design around that as well, that we design once and it's applicable everywhere. We shouldn't have to design interfaces for particular use cases. It's across the board. When we design products, of course, we have to use design systems. And Karen, you're going to be giving a bit of a deep dive on this later on today. You're going to talk about how we can create better accessible design systems. So maybe let's talk about that. Maybe can you talk about how we can do that in a nutshell, and maybe just tease a little bit about what you're going to cover in that session?
Sure. It's actually an 8-hour workshop.
8-hour workshop.
Yeah.
So it's a long one, yes.
It is. But, okay, so when we look at at design systems, I think there's two main takeaways. One is that we should be considering accessibility as early as possible. So it even starts in your styles, setting up your style guides, right? Things like making sure that you have your border radius, the thicknesses and shadows, like setting up all your tokens. Do that because we need to use those tokens when we start to design our components. So the interesting thing I found is that our accessibility requirements and responsibilities, they're different at the different levels of the design system. So like for components, the focus is on designing amazing states, all the different permutations, all the different variations. So not just focus state, not just hover state, but put like real devotion into designing those states. That's very different than when you're designing your patterns, like toolbars and product cards and that kind of thing. This is where we're thinking about the reading order, the focus order, focus management. And if I do a particular thing, does focus stay here? Does it go somewhere else? What should really happen? And then feedback as well. So not just visual feedback, but auditory, tactile, that kind of thing. And then we go up one more level to like you're building your page templates. Well, now we have an opportunity to focus on optimizing as many navigational strategies as possible. And making sure that people are oriented at all times. And so there's a lot to all of that because there's so many different types of components and patterns that we need to think about. But we need to start at the basics, learn those basics, and then I think that you can apply them to even larger and more complicated pieces.
There's a lot there. There's a lot there, and an 8-hour masterclass, I'm sure, is just the tip of the iceberg. So I think if anyone is joining that, you're going to learn an awful lot.
I hope so.
I'm going to ask a very difficult question. This is one that's coming from the audience. Karen, you'd mentioned around about WCAG 2.2 and some other standards that's coming out of the EAA. A question that's come from the audience here is there's currently no detailed testable criteria to confirm whether a product has satisfied all those requirements of the Accessibility Act. How do we address that? Is that being addressed?
I might defer to my...
It doesn't explicitly say WCAG, but you can assume that it's going to be WCAG.
Okay.
Yeah, so just if you're compliant with WCAG, you should be good for the EAA from a digital perspective anyway, yeah.
And it's 2.1?
The latest version, I'd say, 2.2.
2.2.
Yeah.
By
yeah.
June 2025, it
Will
will
be
likely, yeah.
2.2. Okay,
2.2.
perfect. Okay, so I think that's really it. Just conform, aim for WCAG 2.2, AA, and if possible, AAA is what we're saying right now. Perfect.
Yeah.
And of course,
And don't get bogged down by standards and
Yeah.
what you have to do. Start small. Take
Yeah.
a few key practices and start there. But yeah, WCAG 2.2.
absolutely. I think it's showing the willingness to make
Exactly.
that change.
Yeah.
That's what we're looking for here. Is we're not doing it because the law is saying it. We're doing it because it's the right thing. It's
Exactly.
universal design, and we're designing for everyone. Maybe, Gareth, can you talk about it from a developer experience? What tools could developers be using now, and even designers, what tools could we be using now to help us?
Okay, so the tools, or what I encourage developers to do, are sort of 4 key steps when they're doing their work, is to parse their code using a HTML checker. Very simple thing to do. It can catch some issues, which are potential issues for assistive technology. Run some automated checkers. Now, automated checkers only catch a small fraction of issues, but again, good starting point. And there are numerous out there that people can avail of. A big one is test the keyboard. Test all your work with the keyboard. This is one that people just don't do for whatever reason. And there's, I guess, a certain irony that when computers first came out, it was all keyboard and there was no mouse. And we've sort of flipped that now to the point where some sites don't work with a keyboard at all. So test the keyboard. And that goes for designers too. I think it's important to understand the interactions of the components that you're building out. So that's definitely a high priority one. And lastly, I would say, if you can, try it with a screen reader. It's hugely beneficial to see things from a different perspective or hear things from a different perspective.
Fantastic. Mick, maybe we'll talk about trends and innovation. Is there anything right now that you're excited about?
Yeah, loads. I suppose a hot topic is AI and machine learning, but the thing that really excites me is what we've kind of mentioned a little bit, is bringing accessibility throughout the product experience. And it's kind of a shift I see in accessibility engineers' roles, that we're not just testing at the end, and that's where accessibility gets very hard, very costly, and it kind of pushes it to the side, where the role of an engineer now is really, should be more, and hopefully it is becoming more of a trend, but educating teams, breaking that, like WCAG is a very technical documentation. So it's breaking that down into manageable checklists for each owner, for a product owner, having the conversations at the very beginning. What to design, if you break down that success criteria within WCAG and give it kind of primary ownership, there's about probably 30% with development. So if you're leaving it to the very end, then you can solve 70% potentially of issues, roughly, through product, through UX, content, and visual design.
Have it throughout the whole process, have it all there.
Yeah.
And Karen, there's a question that came from the audience a few moments ago, and it was around EAA, asking, is it applicable to existing websites and applications, products and services that exist right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. So anything that's going to be live as of June 28th, 2025, that's when the EAA is going to apply. So anything that you're currently working on or anything that's in your roadmap that will be live post that date, you want to make sure that you're applying your technical specifications now.
Okay. We have about 5 minutes left or so, so we're going to slowly begin to wrap up this. But a quick fire question is, panelists, anyone who'd like to answer this, what really is one thing that surprised you when you first started working in accessibility?
Pushback. Yeah.
Pushback.
When you go into full-time accessibility role where someone is asking for accessibility, you don't expect people to push back and companies to push back, but it comes through awareness and education, but yeah, pushback is always...
What is the biggest myth that you've seen out there?
Has anyone heard of the blueberry analogy? Yes, the blueberry analogy. So that states like, if you're going to bake a blueberry muffin, you can't actually bake the muffin and then put the blueberries in afterwards, right? And so the analogy is that accessibility is the blueberries. You can't, end with accessibility. I think it served its purpose up until now. I have a different perspective in that my problem with it is that the blueberry is finite and it has bounds. And I think rather we need to think about accessibility more like the flour in the muffin, that you have to start with the flour. It's the base of the whole thing, right? And really it's the essence of your muffin. Every bite has flour. And so the point of that is that accessibility is everywhere. And it's not even a thing. That's the point. It's not a thing. Like, we just take care of it just like all of our other functional and non-functional requirements. It's just there, and absolutely everybody has a role to play in seeing that happen.
That's fantastic. I see we've got a few more minutes. I just want to, again, just try some questions from the audience here. There's a question here about how should we tackle products and UIs that are built on old stack, legacy frameworks, that may not be compliant with WCAG 2.1. How would you recommend we handle that situation?
So as part of the EAA, every site will have to have an accessibility statement. So on that statement, you can say the current state of the site and your plans to address things. So while there may be some things that are difficult to make accessible, that won't be a good enough excuse. Like, you need to be a plan for the future as to what you're going to do to address it.
I get you.
For the time being, to be no urgent action, but what's your roadmap? Like, where are you going? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think this is a really, really interesting question around about EU countries can add their own rules. And I know Ireland can have some quite severe consequences. So I'd love to maybe explore that for a moment. Some countries can be more strict. From an Irish perspective, potentially, do you know if Ireland is planning to implement any stricter rules? And can we talk about the impact, potentially? And again, we're not here to sort of scare people into having to act immediately, but maybe let's just entertain that doomsday scenario. What could the worst thing that could happen?
Sure. So if companies are non-compliant generally, in the EAA, there can be fines. You can have your product or service pulled from the market, or you could be banned from selling in the market entirely. Hopefully it won't come to that again. Kind of what Mick said earlier, we don't want this to be the driver for change. In Ireland, there will be potential fines up to €60,000 or imprisonment of up to 18 months. But yeah, again, hope we don't get to that stage. Hopefully people just do the right thing.
That's a lot. And do we know whether Ireland's going to implement any stricter implementations of this?
that's all we're aware of right now. So
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think the part that the EAA Act is pushing is that if they find that there's a finding that you're failing, is to help you improve first.
Yeah.
It's not to hit you straight away
course.
with fines. It's to try to guide you in the right direction.
I'd like to talk for a moment about testing. And Mick, you mentioned about an exciting development is artificial intelligence. And let's talk about a myth, and let's talk about the role of automated testing when it comes to conforming and check marking and saying, yes, we comply. Will AI transform how we do automated testing? Will AI transform how we are doing compliance verification?
I'm not a fortune teller, so I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
But at the moment, the thing with there is a use for automated testing for sure. If you're a developer and it's a great tool to start finding issues. Companies will tell you different things in terms of how much automated tool is going to catch. In my experience, it's generally around 30%. And the problem with just solely focusing on automated tools is you're not getting the full picture. You're not seeing everything, and you're not actually embedding accessibility into your processes. You're doing that thing of finding issues at the end, and it's always a lot more difficult to go back. But yeah,
That's right. It's not just throw it on at the end, verify. The key message is integrated throughout the entire process, from that initial product brief to the design to ideation. And it's something that I know we're taking very seriously about integrating DEI into everything, and accessibility, of course, is a key factor in that. Yeah. Another question that's come from the audience, Karen, I'd like to ask is hiring. Can we see this legislation impacting how we hire product designers and developers into the future? We'll be looking for people with necessary skills, certifications. Will it impact hiring?
I would hope so. Yeah, so as mentioned, I'm working on a working group with the IAAP, the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, and it's about career progression. So I'm kind of on the cusp of where we're trying to go with it. I think the problem is that we don't have clear requirements in order to hire lots of different types of functions. And so we're championing UX, which I think is an interesting function to begin with. We're trying to define all the different requirements, like the skill sets, the competencies that we require for these different functions. And I think it's the legislation coming in is, I think all it's doing is giving us a broader awareness of it, right? And maybe what it'll do, it'll help us expand what those skill sets and competencies are. We're focusing on digital right now. So yeah, I think it'll help expand. But there's things in the works. The IAAP has been working on this for a long time. It's not out yet, but there really isn't anything that we can point people to, right? Like organizations are kind of making it up. And a lot of the recs out there, they're not accurate. Like you want a unicorn? Well, they don't exist, right? Because each function has different responsibilities. I can't do what a dev does. They really can't do what I do, right? We need each other and we need to collaborate. So until we have those clear definitions, I think we're misserving the market.
Fantastic.
Just follow on from that, I think a key part in Ireland and all countries is the hiring of accessibility professionals, or building an accessibility champion within your group.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've got about 2 minutes left. This time flew by, and of course, we can carry on the conversation afterwards. In the next 2 minutes, very briefly, rapid fire, if there's one thing, one knowledge that you can impart upon the audience here and watching online, what would that one thing be, Karen?
I think everyone needs to test their own work, right? Every single person should hold themselves accountable for the accessibility of their output. And that's everybody. And it's not just your product development team. You can extrapolate that to the larger organization. Every email you write, every Word document, PowerPoint, like you're responsible for the accessibility even to your colleagues, to your communities, as well as your customers. Perfect. Right? So test your own work. Make sure that whatever you're outputting is, as good a job as you can do.
Gareth?
Use a screen reader, try it out. Everybody has a screen reader on their phones that are in their pockets right now, or if you're on your desktop computer, there are free versions, NVDA if you're on Windows, or VoiceOver, if you're on Mac, it'll completely change your perspective of how the user interface works. So it's very valuable.
Be curious, kind of following on from that. Learn about the why. Why, look into assistive technology. Google down the road has a assistive technology center that you can go for free and learn why, how people are using. Vision Ireland have a Wayfinder center, and do things like Gareth mentioned. Test the screen reader, and go to talks where people with disabilities are going through their experiences.
Fantastic. That is us. Karen, where can we find out more about yourself? How can we follow you?
Check me out on LinkedIn, Karen Hawkins. You can use some keywords like Toronto engineer, that kind of thing. I'm not the romance novelist, so find me another way. LinkedIn's the best.
There you go, Gareth.
Yeah, likewise, LinkedIn's the best. And you can also follow Accessibility Ireland on LinkedIn as well.
Fantastic. And Mick?
Yeah, LinkedIn.
Same again. Everyone, a big round of applause for our panelists this morning. Exceptional, exceptional. Thank you so, so much. And really, it is a thought-provoking discussion. But the most important takeaway is that this isn't just a requirement. It's everyone's responsibility. And there's great resources. Connect with the teams, connect with the groups. And yeah, thank you so, so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Cheers.
Thank you.